Hello guys, you're welcome once again to another video, and in the last video we were able to set up our Lumen API and do a couple of things like setting up our CORS middleware, installing certain packages that we were to use, and having them placed or having them bootstrapped into our app.php so that we can be able to use them within our application. Okay, so in this video we are going to head straight into writing the endpoints for user login and registration. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into controller, of course, controller.php. So whenever you create a new Lumen project, you always have controller.php and this example controller.php. Basically, the example extends controller.php and controller extends base controller. We're going to write a function here in our controller.php, and what this function is going to help us do is it's going to help us return or basically respond with a token. So in other words, say whenever the user logs in, we can call this function to help us generate our token. And in order for us to be able to do this, we would have to import auth from Laravel Auth So we're going to import that right now. We're going to say use illuminate because we are going to be needing the auth. Okay, so we're going to say illuminate from support facades, right? And this is auth. Having imported our auth facades, what we are also going to next do is to be able to create our function. And I like to call this function respond with token. You can actually call this function whatever you want, but I like to call it respond with token. And we're going to pass a parameter here, which is the token. Respond with token is going to return a JSON response. So we're going to return a JSON response. And our JSON response is going to take a couple of parameters, or our JSON response array is going to take a couple of parameters. So the first is going to be, we're going to have a success here that tells us true. The next parameter is going to be our token, basically our JWT token. And this is going to pass the token. So basically, whenever we register, whenever we log in a user, we're going to generate a token, and that token is going to be passed in here. And then this is going to be what we're going to respond with. And we are also going to specify the token type, and the token type we are specifying here, we are going to call this, sorry, this is not JavaScript. So we're going to call this bearer. And this token type is going to be used on the header. So we're going to say bearer is space, and then we add the token. And then we're going to say expires. So we want to set how long we want this to expire. If you set this to null, it's going to never expire. But I like to set mine. So we're going to call getTTL function, right? And we're going to multiply this by a very huge number. So I know some of you may be asking, what does getTTL mean? Basically, it means get time to leave. So we want to get how long we want the token that we are calling here to leave, basically. Okay, so now that we have done this, we will have to save this. And then one more thing I also like to do is I like to have a utility class, basically, where I kind of put functions that I often use very often. So for that, we are going to create a new folder inside of our HTTP here. And I'm going to call that services. All right, and within our services here, a lot of functions go in. But for these applications, a lot of classes, sorry, go in. But for these applications, we're just going to use one class, since we are not having a lot of data or a lot of, basically, the application is not large. So utility service, the PHP, and our utility service, we're going to give this a namespace so that we can be able to call this within our application. And the namespace is app within the app HTTP services. So basically, app HTTP services. Okay, so now that's the namespace. We're going to call this class utility service. And for our utility service, we are going to use a couple of things here. And the first we're going to use is the HTTP response exception. So we're going to say use illuminate /HTTP, illuminate HTTP, and it's going to come from exceptions. And we're going to call HTTP response exception. So this just helps us throw custom exceptions. So the next thing we are also going to illuminate for this guy is going to be, so next we're also going to import, not illuminate, sorry guys, is going to be our hash facade, which we're going to use to hash our passwords. So this is going to come from facades and hash. All right, so illuminate support facades hash. So our first function we are going to have is going to be the function I'll call is 200 response. So this is going to be called anytime we are just trying to throw a response that basically just takes a response message as its only parameter. So you're going to see why this is very useful, because a lot of times we do this a lot of the times where say success equal to true with just a response message in our JSON endpoint. All right, so for this function, we're going to throw a new HTTP error response exception. Yep. And this is going to be response and this passes an array. So our array is going to take just to success here will be set to true, and the second one is the message. And now this message is going to be set to whatever is our response message. So we're going to have another function here, and that function is going to be is 42 response to respond. All right, so is 42 response. We're going to pass response message here, and we are going to do quite similar things we did here. So throw no exception, pass that in here. So this is for 422 response. And the next we're going to have is going to be 500 response, which I rarely use. I'd prefer to use try and catch, but sometimes you get to use them sometimes. So 500 response, and for 500 response, the way I like to do my 500 response, which you are going to see, is I like to add another extra parameter here. So for 42, of course, success is false. For 500, of course, success is false. So for 500, I like to add an extra parameter here of error, and this error is going to carry our response message too. And this can be useful whenever you're working with form request. Okay, you're going to see how this can be useful. And I'm also making a mistake here. I'm supposed to be writing the response here, response code, right? And here it's supposed to be 200. And here is supposed to be, right here is 500. All right. And the last one we are going to have is going to be 401 response. So I'm going to say public function is 401 response. So basically, if the user is trying to access a route and he is not authenticated, or basically is not authenticated, we want to show that user a 401 response. For my 401s, I also like to have an error message as well as a message. But for 401, we wouldn't pass any parameter. Usually, it's just going to be a string for the both of them, telling this guy he unauthenticated. Okay. And the last function we're going to have here is going to be responsible for hashing our passwords. So I'm going to call this public function hash password, and this is going to take our password, and this is going to return a hash of our password. So I'm going to use Laravel's hash make, and we're going to pass the password. All right, and now I'm going to save this. And now that we have written our utility service, the next thing I'd like us to do is to create the controllers. So basically, we're going to create a couple of controllers here, or just two controllers basically. And we're going to create a new terminal here, new bash scripting terminal. And we are going to say php artisan make controller, right? Is that it? No, sorry, small letter. Make controller, and we're going to call the first controller user controller, or user controller. Let's just call it user controller. Right? Yep, user controller could not open artisan. Okay, that's because we have not moved into React multi-auth YouTube folder. Right? Yep. And now if I run php artisan make controller, yes, our controller has not appeared. Let me refresh this. And yep, here we have our user controller. So we're going to make another controller as php artisan make controller, and this is going to be admin controller. Yes, and our admin controller also pops up here. So we have our user controller, we have our admin controller. And in the last video, we also created the models. So we had user, the PHP, the user model, as well as the admin model. All right, so now we are going to go back into our user controller. And for our user controller, we're going to be performing every action that pertains to the user. So, but before we head on to do that, what I want to do first of all is I'm going to go into web.php and I'm going to create a couple of routes here. So I'm going to get rid of this because basically we don't need this anymore. And I'm going to call the router instance. And I'm going to group our routes because we have two different users within the application. We have the user and we have the admin. So I'm going to group our routes. So I'm going to group them with a prefix, all right? And our prefix is going to be, the first prefix is going to be user. So anytime you want to say call the route within user, you have to say slash, say endpoint slash user slash, say register slash login slash view profile slash logout. Okay, so we are going to have our prefix here. And we're going to have a function, right? And our function is going to have to use a router instance. And right in here, we are going to define our route. All right, so we are going to create our first route here. And our first route is going to be register. And our register is going to make use of the user controller, which we just created. And the method is going to be register. So that's our register route. For our login route, we are going to say router. Our login is also a post request. So we're going to have post and it's going to be login. And yep, of course, user controller at login. We're going to have a view profile route too. And this route is going to help us view our profile. So we're going to call view profile and not view profile, view profile. And this is going to be our user controller at view profile. Okay, so we have register, we have login, we have view profile. We're going to create another route here that's going to help us with our logout. So this is going to be a get variable, and this is going to be logout. Okay, so we're going to say user controller at logout. So we have register, login, view profile, logout, and the last route we're going to be adding here is going to be our refresh token. So basically refreshing our token. Okay, so refresh token, I'm going to have user controller at refresh token. Okay, so we have now successfully defined the routes for our user. So what I'm going to do now is for our admin, I'm just going to copy this for our user and I'm going to paste that in here. And our prefix is going to be admin. And we're going to change everything here from user to admin controller. So admin, and this is going to be admin, and this is going to be admin. This is also going to be admin. And lastly, admin. So I can save that, and now we have successfully defined our route, and we can now head back to our user controller. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get back to this and close saved. Oh boy, no. Cancel. I want to close saved basically. All right, so we have our user controller here, and in our user controller, we're going to create our constructor. So public function constructor. All right, and just get this around, and let me just, so that I don't make a mistake, end of this class here. Okay, so within our constructor, we are going to specify the middleware we are going to be using for this controller. All right, so remember, if you go to our config/auth, basically we set certain things here. We set user as the default guard, and we also had another guard here called admin too. So you can see guards we have user and we have admin. So in order for us to be able to use the guard that has been specified for the user, we're going to use the middleware function in Laravel. And this middleware function takes two parameters. As you can see, the first parameter is our middleware guard. And the second parameter is basically the functions that you don't want this middleware to apply to within this controller. Okay, so we're going to call our middleware, which is user. And as for the functions that we don't want our middleware to apply to, we're going to use except here. And the functions are login and register. Login function and register function. Basically, these are the two functions the user can access even though he has not logged in, because for you to basically access, for you to be able to register or create an account, we don't have to tell you that you must have logged in. All right, and same goes to login too. Okay, so now having done this, we are also going to import a couple of things within this controller, and the first of them is going to be our user model. So we're going to say use app /user. We're also going to import our utility service. So use app /http /services /utility service. And let's see, services, right? Let's see, app http services, yep, utility service.php. Let me see the name of the class. It's called utility service. All right, so we can now save this, and we are going to define variables here. So protected user and protected utility service. So we're going to have user and utility service, and we are going to call them within our constructor. So user is going to be the instance of our user, and utility service is going to be the instance of utility service. Oh boy, that's a typo. Utility, yep, that's a class. All right, so now having defined these two instances of these two classes, the next thing we are going to do is we're going to write our register function. So I'm going to say public function register. All right, register. And for our register method, we are supposed to pass the request object here, but I personally don't like to do things this way. What I like to do is to create a separate request form, all right? And then I'm going to import the request form within here and use that within our application. And thanks to one of the packages we installed, I can't remember the name, but if I go to the PHP within our Bootstrap, it's called Form Request Service Provider. Of course, this comes out of the box with Laravel, but with Lumen, you have to install a package, and this is the package you use, and it works great. Just a little bit of difference, but it works really great. Okay, so what we are going to do now is we're going to go back here. So what I like to do is I'm going to create a new file within our HTTP, and we're going to call this file request, right? Requests. And inside of our requests, we're going to create a register request, or say a user register request.php. And within our user register request, the first thing we're going to import is going to be, but before we import, actually, we'll have to add the namespace so that we can be able to import this elsewhere. So we're going to write our namespace, and this is located within the app, not capital letter, HTTP requests. So within the request folder, yes. So now that we have done this, we would love to import a couple of packages. All right, and the first is going to be our awesome form request package, which we bootstrapped into our app.php. So this is urameshibir, right? /request/form request. The next we're going to use is going to be the validator. So we're going to call illuminate /contract /validation /validator. And then the last but not the least, which we're going to import, which is going to be our HTTP response exception. And the reason why we are going to be importing this is because we want our form request to be able to return JSON response if there is any error. So exception /HTTP response exception. Exception. And now that we have imported these three classes, what we can now do is we're going to write our user register request, and this is going to extend our form request, which is the package that we installed. All right, and this is going to be our class. And just like Laravel's form request, we're going to have an authorize here. So basically, we want to give access to this particular, or to whoever is trying to access this particular form request, or this particular request, user register request. And we're going to set this to true. And then the second we are going to have is going to be our rules. So we're going to set our rules. And for our rules, we're going to return an array. All right. And for the array, we're going to have the name. For name, we want to be sure that the name is required. Oh, what am I typing? So we want to be sure that the name is required. The next is going to be the email. For the email, we want to be sure that the email is required. Not just that it is required, but it is a valid email. And not just that it's a valid email, since we are registering, we want to also check to see if that email is unique. In the sense that if that email already exists, it should tell us that the email already exists. And the last is going to be the password. And the password is going to be really simple, just 2 parameters. And the first is going to be, of course, we need the password to be required. And then the second is going to be that the password should be a minimum of 8 characters. And now that we have set the rules, we can then go on to set our custom error messages. So our custom error messages is going to override the default messages that these guys come with. So for our name error message, our name required, so basically whenever it says required, whenever the name is required, we want to show an error message that says name field is required. Next up is going to be for our email. So whenever our email is required, we want to say email field is a lot of typos today. What is it? Required. Okay, we have an error here, and that is because we have forgotten to return this as an array. So the next step is going to be, after our name and our email, next up is going to be if that is not a valid email, we want to tell the user, please enter a valid email. A valid email. And the next is going to be for unique, basically for unique, right? Unique users. So if the email is not unique, which means the user already exists, we're going to tell this guy, say this email address has already been taken. The next step is going to be our password. So for our password field is required. And the last of them all is going to be when we have a password that is less than 8 characters. And for that, we're going to say password.min. And we're going to say your password must be 8 characters and above. And now that we have set our message, the last thing we are going to set here, which will determine how our error messages will display, is going to be field validation. So I'm going to say public function field validation. So this is going to use the validator, and we're going to call this validator. And for this, we're going to throw new HTTP response exception. And for our new HTTP response exception, we are going to use response JSON, all right? And this is going to be a 422 error message. And what I'm going to set here is I'm going to set success as false. And the next thing I'm going to set is going to be our error messages. So I'm going to get all the error messages from our validator, and I'm going to display them as errors. So on the part of our React application, we're going to see how we can get all the error messages, get them to display individually. And then we can then also set a message here, just a generic message that says one or more field. Or we could say, let's just one or more field. One or more fields are required. Or not entered properly. Okay guys, so now we save this guy, and what we can now do is we can now use our user register request within our user controller. So we're going to get back straight into our user controller, and then we are going to import from app HTTP request user register request. So we're importing our user register request from our request folder. And then one more thing we also need to import here is going to be, for now, we're going to import our time on JWT exception token expiration or token expiration exception. And this is going to come from time on JWT auth, right? / I spelled exceptions correctly? Yes. Token expired exception. And now we save this. And now we head back into our register controller. In our register controller, we can now call our user register request and call this request. All right, so user register request, am I correct? Yes, user register request and call this request. All right, so if this was to be Laravel, we'll use something like say request validated first, right? But here we don't do this using this package. Once you pass this within this function, it will automatically do the validation for you and return as a JSON response the error messages if there are any error messages. And if there are none, it just moves on perfectly. So what we're going to do next is we're going to hash the password. So I'm going to say password hash, and I'm going to call our utility service here, and I'm going to call hash password. And this is going to take our request password. And now, after we have hashed our password, the next thing is I'm going to call a method we have not yet created yet. So this user creates user, and create user is going to take two parameters. The first is a request, and the second is a password hash. And after we have created the user, we want to show a success message with a 200 response. So I'm going to say success message will be equal to registration completed successfully. And for our success, we are going to return this from our utility service. Oh boy, sorry guys. This utility service, right? This utility service is 200 response. So basically it's 200 response showing that everything went well, and we're going to pass success message. So this is about it for register. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to save this, and we have an error here because we missed this at the forward front. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into our user model, and in our user model, I'm going to create this function here called create user that takes the request object and the password that has been hashed. So right in our user model, I'm going to get down here, and I'm going to create a function here called create user, public function, oh boy, create user. And our create user takes the request and the password that has been hashed already. And what I want to do is I'm going to say data. So basically the data is going to be this data to create. And for data to create, we're going to pass the request object, and we're going to pass the hashed password. And after we have gathered the data that we are going to create, let me get rid of this right here. We are then going to call eloquent create method, and we're going to pass the data. All right. And we would want to return this. Okay, so now let's create this data to create here, public function data to create. And our data to create method, as we have seen, takes the request and takes password hash as the two parameters. So what we can do is we can call data, and we're going to pass an array here, and we are going to return data. And data is going to take the name, the email, and the password. So for the name, we are going to call our request, right? Our request object, which we passed here, and the name. The next is going to be the email, and we're going to call our request object and the email. And the last is going to be our password, and we're going to call our hashed password because we cannot save web passwords. We can only save hashed passwords. All right, so now that this is done, I'm going to save this. And I'm going to head back into our user controller, and I'm also going to save our user controller. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to head to Postman, right? So let's go to my database, and trying to remember what was the DB name again. It was called multi-auth DB, right? Yes. So our tables, we have user, and let me just close all this. All right, so we have users, and now we have our users table. So I'm going to head into Postman, so that we can be able to test this API or this endpoint. And I'm going to create a new collection, right? And I'm going to call this collection YouTube Lumen multi-auth React, right? Or YouTube multi-Lumen auth API, right? And I'm just going to leave the description blank. I'm going to create this. And here we are. I'm going to create a new request for you. Add request. So I'm going to call this request register a new user. And here I'm going to say register a new user. endpoint. All right, so for the collection, it's going to be within our YouTube, this guy, and that is good. So now we're going to click on register user. No, I'm going to close you. Don't save. And don't save. So I'm going to click on this, and yep, we have him here. And this is going to be a post request, and our endpoint is user/register. Of course, we saw that if we head to web.php, you can see our prefix /user/register. So for our /user/register, we're going to pass the name, the email, and the password. We're not going to set anything in the headers. So first of all, if I click on send, right, we are having an error here. Why are we having an error here? Let me see. We're having an error saying form request service provider on line 30. And this error is caused by the fact that we forgot to return this here. Because if we don't return this, we're not going to be authorized to basically use this. And you can't just have true like this. So we have to return true. So that's where the problem is coming from. All right, so now if I head back in here and try to register, you can see it tells me name is empty, email is required, password is required. So what we can do further is we can to the top, right? And our body. For our body, I want to use raw JSON data, right, in here, and let this read this as a JSON instead. All right, so I'm going to say, I'm going to say name, and our name is going to be Desmond. Our email, right? Email is the second one, if I'm correct. It should be desmond@gmail.com. And then the last is our password. Our password should be password. All right, so now if I forgot to say, give this a parameter here, as password. So if I were to say pass, and I click on send, we are having an error again. Why? Let me drag that up. And what is this time around? So 500 internal server error. And it is saying from user where email is equal to email. Oh boy, we made another stupid mistake. And that's because in our register request, is it register request? Yes, here. So let's get rid of this. So now let's head back, and if I click on this, you can see message, one or more fields are not entered properly. You can see your password must be 8 characters and above. All right, so if I go on to write password, desmond@gmail.com password is password. Click on send. You can see success through registration completed successfully. If I get in here, you can see we have our new user, desmond@gmail.com with that password. Okay, so for the login of this user, we can create a new function here, say public function. And our login function is going to take our login request. We're going to create that. We have not yet created that. I'm going to pass the request object here. And we want to get the credentials. Basically, we are going to be getting only 2 credentials, which are going to be using to generate our token. And it's going to be the email and the password. And what we're going to do now is we're going to say if this is not the user, so we want to show the user a message. Now for these things get a bit complicated here. Now in order for us to be able to target this particular user, we'll use our auth, and we are going to be targeting our user guard, which is our user, and we are going to use our attempt. So basically, if it was admin, we're going to pass admin here. So, but if we had no user admin, it would just be auth guard, and it will pick the default. So we have to add user here, and for our attempt, we're going to pass the credentials. So if this token auth guard credentials, then we can now set a response message, and our response message is going to say invalid username or password. Okay, so we can now return. We're going to use our utility service is 422 response, and we're going to pass our response message here. All right, so if this guy eventually logs in, we want to return this with the token. Of course, we're supposed to respond with token, and we're going to respond with our GWT token. because this guy is extending our controller class, we are able to do this. So now we have this for our login. What we can do is we're going to create a login request. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, under request, I'm going to create a new request. I'm going to call this login, user login request, so not login request, user login request to PHP. And right in here, I'm going to call this user login request. And in our user login request, I'm going to copy what we have for our user register and paste that in here. All right, and we don't need the name basically. We just need the email and the password. And the email should be required, should be an email, it should be this, can go, we don't need this. And the password required, password meaning. All right, so password required, password meaning, we don't need name. And I also made, or basically I did something and then I reverted it, which was wrong. We need this guy here to be unique because we are registering. Like, this thing confuses me and I've been going back and forth with it. So unique user, right? So we can save that, and each time the email is not unique, we tell the guy this email has already been taken. All right, so where will we be in our user login request? Yes. So for our user login request, it requires the email and the password. So now what we can do is we head back to our database and we have Desmond and Desmond@gmail.com. So now let's log in with Desmond. We're going to target our login route, so /login, and I'm going to skip the name. If I click send, we have another error here. Why? What is this error saying? Class user does not exist. User login request. User is supposed to be user login request. So let's change this here. So user login request. Close, saved, and go back to our user controller. And we're using user login request, and we have not imported user login request here. So we are going to do that. Oh boy. So now let's just copy this, paste it in here. And this is our user, all right, user login request. Save that. We'll need to import the authorization here. So I'm going to call illuminate support authorization auth. So let's go to our user.php. And now we'll have to ensure that our TimeJWT subject, which has already been imported here, is being used here. So I'm going to just copy this now and paste that here. Save that and get back. Now click on send, and yep, our login is successful. It generates our token, our bearer, and when it expires. So that is going to be just about that for our user login and registration API or endpoint. In the next video, we're going to look at the admin login and registration endpoint.